Food Chain seems to me like a deck that I'd be pretty favored against.
Well, both of these decks are fair combo decks, and in that sense, I think High Tide generally has the advantage there.
Yeah, they're both like these slower combo decks that get to play missed cards like Misdirection, Force of Will, Counter Spells. But thanks to the fact that High Tide is a very singular-minded deck, it's trying to do just one thing, it can be brutally efficient at doing that.
Yeah, and it actually can be pretty decent at disrupting your opponent also.
Yeah, Feline starts with the turn 1 Sensei's Divine Top. She is going to get duressed by Andrew Wright. Now, one interesting thing that Feline has done in High Tide, if you haven't watched the Open Series a lot recently, is that she does have a full set of counterbalances in her board. And in a control mirror like this might be where you'd see her board them in to go with her Divining Tops.
Yeah, it's entirely possible. I mean, I'm not sure how much Andrew knows about her deck list. I feel like it is pretty static from tournament to tournament. However, Andrew does have access to 3 Abrupt Decays in the main deck, so if he wants to, he has access to something that could potentially break up Counterbalance.
Yeah. He's going to duress. He takes a High Tide out of her hand. That leaves her with an Island, a Divining Top, a Brainstorm, and a Candlestick. She draws the turn and is going to play an Island. Candlestick, one of those cards that is really good in your fast combos, but if you're playing a positional like blue mirror, it's actually a pretty weak draw in the deck.
Right, it doesn't really do anything except for the turn that you want to kill them, right?
Yeah, the turn you want, it makes your combos bigger, it makes them less likely to fail. You maybe can do them for more mana. There's a lot of good things about it, but it is one of it doesn't win a counter war. And you see Feline now playing that counterbalance, and we'll see just how good this is. Has Andrew left in his Abrupt Decays?
Well, this is game 3. There's the potential that he saw them in game 2 also, so maybe he knows.
Yeah, and once again, I think High Tide isn't going to lock people with counterbalance the same way that Miracles does. It's going to get a lot of value out of it, not to be mistaken, but...
Yeah, I feel like with this card, you just want to counter the duresses. You want to stop him from playing any sort of Deathrite Shamans, which is a card that he actually has in his hand. Maybe you can stop them manipulate fates.
Yeah, I mean, that's the best part of counter top is that you always have a 1-drop to counter.
Right.
And she's going to spin top on end step in response. Andrew's going to go ahead and Vendilion Click. So she gets a chance to blind counter it. That's not going to work. And there's kind of a double whammy here is that he gets to look at her hand, take one, and put it on the bottom, and force her to draw another Candlestick. But he's going to put away Candlestick to get her to draw a Candlestick. So I will say when playing High Tide, this is one thing that I've noticed. If players have not played a lot against High Tide, I think you often see the mistake that people think the Candlestick is way more important than it is.
Yeah. And like we were talking about, the Candelabra really doesn't do a whole lot up until the turn where Feline is actually going for the kill.
Right, and it's if you're going to do this thing, if High Tide's doing a thing where they're sitting behind countertop, I don't think Candelabra is a very important card to them.
Yeah, probably not. I mean, you saw Feline with an excess top in her hand, holding on to that. She had an opportunity to actually run that out there and cast it, but she basically just wants to brainstorm that back to the top of the deck. And I think she probably wanted to do that with Candelabra too, where it's you don't actually need Candelabra to go off. You would rather have some other draw spell.
Right. If I had the Candelabra in my hand, I wouldn't cast it. I would just wait till I had a fetch line and brainstorm the thing away.
Right.
There is a little bit of judge call right here. If you went back to the turn on the Vendilion Click, she'd activated a top, and the Vendilion Click was cast in response to the trigger. They resolved the V-Click, and then she went ahead and took her next turn and drew a card and didn't resolve the top activation.
Right.
I do think the resolution for that is that Feline just does not get her top activation. Yeah, they're not going to back it up. There is a warning issued to the players for missing a trigger. Well, it's missing an activated ability that was already on the stack.
Right.
So it's not a missed trigger. I don't know the official word for it. But the result is it's a warning, and she doesn't get to look at the top 3. And looking at the top 3 now, she's going to pop the top here. And that's going to counter the Deathrite Shaman. Did it clear the way for something else? No. And what is the advantage to running out a Deathrite there into the Divining Top?
If that is all you have, if you're all in on Vendilion Click and you have Deathrite Shaman and Air, you can present that as kind of a test spell, and your first reaction was, okay, so what does he have to follow this up with?
Exactly.
But yeah, you make Feline think about that. It's like, well, maybe he's actually going to play like a really good 2-drop, and maybe I want to stop that somehow. So like maybe you just let the Deathrite Shaman sit there. You think you can beat the Deathrite, you're worried about something else maybe.
And here, Feline's going to cast Snap on Vendilion Click. It's an interesting thing. Normally you wouldn't want to give someone back the Vendilion Click. We'll see what she's up to here.
I feel like this might be one of those things where she found a 3 with counterbalance and is trying to counter it on the way back down, or at least just buy herself some more time.
Yeah, I wouldn't be too surprised. That's my reaction as well. And we'll see if Andrew wants to fight over this. He can, because Feline can't, you know, she's tapping out here. It's only a momentary tap out. Once the snap resolves, she gets 2 mana back. Part of that whole Urza cycle of cards, you know, the free spells cycle. They pay for themselves.
That was a fun cycle, right?
That's completely balanced, right? Spells costing 0. That's like, there's no way to break that.
You just have a threshold where you need 2 mana in play.
What's wrong with Frantic Search? Why can't we play Frantic Search in Legacy?
It would be pretty good in High Tide.
That was my first. I was like, man, if we could play that card in Legacy, it would be really good in High Tide. Oh, I get to draw 2, discard 2, make some mana for 0. Yeah, I'm in the market for that. I could get behind that spell. So the snap resolves. Andrew goes back to his turn. He's going to cast Duress. It looks like he's assuming there's a 3 on top of the deck. You see, he didn't try to end step the Vendilion Click there.
Right. And leading with Duress is pretty nice because if there is a 3 on top and Feline wants to protect her hand, she's going to have to put the top on top, and then Andrew will be free to resolve this Vendilion Click.
Yeah, Candlestick, because she shuffles the top, shows a Candlestick. That's going to counter the Duress. Does have another blue open. You have to think there's a 3 still waiting there. There is a nice thing that he can make Feline draw this Candlestick, which she can't be like too much. She draws a Candlestick. He's going to go for Vendilion Click. She, in return, casts Brainstorm. And there's going to be a 3 on top. It's Wipe Away.
So that's what she was up to. Her last card in hand was a Wipe Away, which she got to Brainstorm back.
Right. And more importantly, she gets a fetch land here. She decided to keep the second Candlestick as well. She has another top here, you see. Has a fetch land, has choosing not to crack it yet. Maybe actually wants to draw the Wipe Away. She's got a lot of tools here, but she's really taking her time going for the kill.
Yeah, I mean, you have top counterbalance set up. Your opponent's not doing too much. I can't imagine thinking that something like Food Chain is going to have a lot of disruption that they could potentially draw into, right? So, like, you're not really losing out on waiting. I do feel like the waiting game favors the High Tide deck.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like I said, when you're playing High Tide, if you can get every game to last until turn 8, like, you're probably a favorite against almost everything. Eventually, they have to kill you because you're playing only blue cards, and blue cards are great generic answers.
Right.
He went for a Baleful Strix, but she was able to get a Merchant Scroll on top, this time for counterbalance, to take care of that one. And I want to kind of just pick your brain a little bit about counterbalance being used in this way. You know, this is, like, we see this before, you know, it almost felt like she's locked him out of the game, but she hasn't. This is, like, not where you would normally see counterbalance. It's doing something a little different.
I think the last time we saw top counterbalance used in this way was in the Hulk Flash deck from Grand Prix Columbus circa like 2007.
So the really broke one that got banned.
Right. The one that Steve Saden won the tournament with.
Yeah.
And it was this really fast combo deck that could kill you on turn 1, but it also featured top counterbalance to do this sort of thing where, like, you can kind of protect yourself. It was good in the mirror matches, and you already have top. You kind of want something like top in your deck to get around all this disruption, all these duresses, like either float a good card or use it to find some good cards after your hand has been disrupted.
Yeah. What a great format where you can have a combo deck that not only does it kill on turn 1, but it also gets to play countertop.
Right.
Like, it's a great deck. Feline now sitting behind her counterspell wall. She's going to start resolving these Merchant Scrolls. First one's going to go ahead and get herself a High Tide. You see she has 2 uncracked fetches, 2 tops, a counterbalance. She has plenty of control with this counterbalance, and you're just setting up the slow combo. I would expect that before she decides to win, she's going to have like a High Tide, a Spiral, and maybe like a Flusterstorm and a Pact or something like that.
I would expect her to have a lot of disruption because, again, she's not under any pressure. She can sit back and sculpt her hand to the best of her ability, and there's not a whole lot Andrew can actually do about it.
And Preordain is the first spell cast here. Both bottom and drawing. She's sitting on that high tide there. She already has Spiral and Tide in her hand and another Candlestick, but why, what's the rush? And she's gonna crack one of the fetch lands, it looks like here. She has a Cunning Wish in her hand that she's gonna go ahead and burn to presumably get an offensive counter spell. I would imagine it's Pact of Negation.
Right. That's what I would think as well.
Cunning Wish, you see it here. It's gonna get exiled, assuming it resolves. And he has a Misdirection in hand. That doesn't do too much. He's gonna Flusterstorm it. And she can counter the original Flusterstorm, but the Storm copies the copy-offs will still resolve. So she can pop a top, draw a card, reveal the top to counter the original Flusterstorm. She actually has to reveal it first. And you don't know whether that happened. You don't know what she said, or like if she verbally said counter it and didn't show it, is probably she'll get leniency on it. I
mean, I think she's still okay. Like worst case scenario, she gets a land, puts the other top on top and reveals that, and then pays the one. So the next turn you have to spend a mana to replay your top, and that's not that big of a deal, right?
Yes. Yeah. Okay, that's what's going to happen. So holding with all right.
Yeah, she knew what she wanted to do and just kind of skipped a step.
Yeah, so that copies the original Flusterstorm. There is still a copy. Now she pays for the copy. And now her Cunning Wish gets to resolve. And is it Pact of Negation? I imagine so. It's Turnabout. That's not too bad either. If she just can tap him out, then she can go off in peace. Yeah, she does have a Pact of Negation in her board as well.
Yeah, Pact of Negation might be one of those cards that you side in because you'd rather have it as a Merchant Scroll target rather than a Cunning Wish target, so I can certainly see that.
Sometimes you'll see people play 2 Pact of Negations in their board so that they can have one to scroll for and one to wish for post board. But you're absolutely right. It's very possible that the Pact is already in her main deck. It looks like she's actually getting Surgical Extraction. She's going to Surgical out the Flusterstorms.
I kind of like this. This is like wish for Pact of Negation. You get to stop one spell, right? But now it's basically just like wishing for a peak. You get to see what Andrew's up to.
Exactly. And what I like more than, it's not just he's removing the Flusterstorm, it's just that she's looking at Andrew's hand. And that's pretty important here. I know when I played High Tide, like I try to play a couple of Jataxian probes just because like this effect is very powerful.
Right. Yeah, I mean, knowing what sort of like spell pierce days, Force of Will shenanigans you have to play around is very important.
Right. And the coast is mostly clear here. Remember, this is all on Andrew's end step as well. So she's setting up to untap and win this turn.
Yeah.
And
that definitely looks like that's the plan.
And I think she's got it too. It looks like it based on what she saw in Andrew's hand.
Things could potentially go awry. Ultimately, she is trying to kill with Time Spiral, which can backfire. Also, Andrew has a Misdirection in his hand with 4 mana on tap. So if Feline somehow gets careless and high tides, and then Andrew has extra mana, he can hard cast Misdirection on a Blue Sun Zenith. Like, I don't think these things are going to happen.
She recasts her top. And she's going to give Andrew another draw. Without her Merchant Scroll there.
Yeah, so like I was saying, Time Spiral could potentially brick, so I think Feline might just be setting it up to the point where she has enough things like Sensei's Divining Top in play, and it makes it very, very unlikely that she'll actually brick.
Yeah. Alternatively, what she can do is, because she has 2 Candlesticks and 2 High Tides in hand, is she can actually just go ahead and Zenith and never cast a Time Spiral if she's worried about giving it Andrew something good. Like, she presumably has enough just raw mana right now that, one of the ideas of High Tide is that you would like to cast as few Time Spirals as possible. And I think she can come off with casting 0.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
And we'll see. Maybe it's just 1 High Tide. If so, it's going to be harder. And
well, at this point, Feline has top counterbalance, a lot of combo pieces. I'm not sure how much interaction she actually has, but what is the worst that Andrew could do, right?
Yeah, he's going to cast Duress. She'll spin top. There was a 1 on top. It's a Ponder. Reveal it. Duress is countered. Andrew with not much. It looks like he has a missed Hollow Griffin, a Vendilion Click, a misdirection. And okay, this is the turnabout. She scrolled for turnabout, and this is on Andrew's end step. She's going to turnabout all his lands. You can misdirect turnabout. It does target a player.
Ultimately doesn't accomplish a whole lot. I just know that Feline is very wary of that misdirection. That's what it seems like. So if you get Andrew to misdirect the turnabout has kind of already done his job.
Exactly. She'd be more than happy to trade this with a counter spell. And you're going to see him do it. He's going to go ahead and tap her things instead. Maybe he'll tap her artifacts. That'd be pretty neat. It's still Ponder on top. Not going to counter misdirection. And the interesting part about turnabout is you think it's a modal spell like Cryptic Command, but actually you choose which thing you're tapping. You choose whether you're tapping or untapping, and which thing you're doing it to on resolution,
right,
not when you declare the spell.
Yeah, so you can misdirect it, and it's like, okay, I'll untap my stuff.
Right, I can be like, tap your lands. You can be like, no, actually, I'll misdirection it. I'll untap my creatures, and if that works. You get to redo the whole spell. And that works because the card is formatted. It's old, so it works. Like, I think where that printed now, it wouldn't work this way.
Yeah, I agree with that.
It's from Tempest, I believe.
Or is it Saga?
There's a Saga? Oh, I'm totally off. Okay. Oh, yeah. You're right. We have all these things where we just get to just all this free resource stuff in Urza's Saga. God. And Vendilion Click targets her. She has 3 spirals and a High Tide. He puts the High Tide on the bottom. Thought there were more High Tides, but no, it was just a bunch of spirals. Untap her lands. So, like, this is a pretty bad hand she's left with, but at 13 with countertop in play, you still have to think she's doing just fine. She spins Divining Top here. Let's see, Ponder was the draw for the turn. And we've drawn another cantrip of sorts. We'll start with the Ponder, see what the top 3 are. If we can, she really just needs to find another High Tide. The Brainstorm would be the ideal draw. She finds Force of Will. So right now she has Force of Will, Wipe Away, Spiral, and Candlestick. She's going to wipe away the Vendilion Click. Looking like she's planning to force it on the way back down.
Potentially. Also, maybe just buying more time.
Yeah, maybe she has a 3 on top as well. He's going to cast the Vendilion Click. Yeah, she shows Cunning Wish.
Okay.
So, much stronger. Now Andrew, once again, with no clock. And, like, that's what she's done with Counterbalance this game, right? She's just, he never has a clock. She's getting infinite turns with this thing. And, yeah, she did reveal the Cunning Wish there. There's some time trouble happening here. So they're at about a minute. We'll see if they have an extension or whatnot. There was a judge call earlier, so I wouldn't be surprised if they do.
Yeah. And looks like Feline is still just setting up here.
Yep. And Andrew's going to go ahead and from exile going to cast a Mist Hollow Griffin. You can only keep this deck off 3/3 flyers for so long.
You need to pacifism that guy.
Yeah. You can pacify him. Play a 3/4 flyer. And he's going to go for Pithing Needle. Well, that one's certainly not going to work. We'll see how Feline decides to counter it. Spin top first, see if she can find a 1.
Yeah, still has the Brainstorm on top.
Yep, and she'll show it. That counters the Needle. And back to her. And she's going to cast Cunning Wish for High Tide. And remember, you wonder what a High Tide is doing there? That is a nod to the fact that Food Chain and many of these decks play surgical extractions in their own sideboards. The reason you board one out is so that they don't surgical all 4 of your High Tides.
Right, and back in the olden days, you could let them surgical all 4. You'd still be able to Cunning Wish for any card that was exiled, but no longer.
All right, we have reached time in the round. This is turn 1. From Feline side, I don't foresee this being too much of a problem. She'll probably go off on turn 5, maybe turn 3 if she's
No, it looks
feeling
like
really
she's just doing
ambitious.
it now.
All right, we're gonna start on high tide. That, remember, as we've seen before, that die indicates that islands are tapping for 2. She's going to run out lots of cards here. It is another counterbalance, another candelabra, and she's gonna go ahead and cast Time Spiral, untapping, getting ready to untap 6 lands, well, 5 lands it looks like, and have a candlestick still left. Looks like there is 8 mana floating over the top.
It's a pretty good place to be. Draw 7, you have top to look at 3 more.
Draw 7 with top and 2 counterbalances for whatever your opponent draws into. Your opponent is tapped out. You have 8 mana. Your Mylan's tapped for 2. You have 5 of them in a candlestick. It's not guaranteed, but it's pretty close.
Yeah, like I said earlier, I have never fizzled off a Time Spiral personally, and I would be very shocked to see Feline do that.
I have fizzled off a Time Spiral before. I've had the honor.
You're just unlucky.
It was fine. I won the next turn.
That's a rarity.
The hand was still good. It just couldn't win.
Okay.
I try, have I fizzled off like 5 lands? No. It's like when you go for the 3 land spirals, sometimes you can't get there. But you still get to end the turn with like a couple Force of Wills and like another spiral that you just couldn't cast. So usually things are fine.
Sure.
And you see her new hand here, and actually because of, you see a Surgical Extraction in it. She did wish for that earlier, so it's now part of her deck, so when she reshuffles.
Yeah, it's like, oh, what's this doing here?
Yeah. Absolutely. 3rd Candlestick hits play. Now we might get to see the spicy play of turnabout untapping my artifacts. That's one of my favorite ones. Just to make a zillion mana.
Yeah, Turnabout does have a bunch of modes.
Yep.
And sometimes, normally you're just like, okay, high tide, turnabout my lands, but once you do have enough high tides going and enough candelabras in play, turnabouting your own candelabras makes a ton of mana.
Yeah. I think my favorite interaction is if you ever play turnabout against a high tide player, say if you misdirection it at them, like there's this weird interaction where if I have a candlestick and lands in play, like you have to tap, like you get this weird interaction where if
you're like, okay, I'll float 4 mana, and then you're like, okay, that's fine.
Tap your artifacts.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I've done that in the high tide mirror.
So instead, what the correct play for the high tide player to do is to say I'll float half my mana.
Right.
Which seems really bizarre. And we see a ton more mana, a large Blue Sun Zenith. She's going to leave all her lands untapped, but tap all her candlesticks to draw what I can only imagine is a lot of cards. We'll get an exact count on that one in a second. It's most likely enough cards. And we are on to the formality part of it.
It's like 15 or so.
Okay. 18.
Yeah, that should probably do it.
I would think so. There's probably a turnabout in there, so she probably has a million mana now. We see a Merchant Scroll, a Surgical, a lot of lands, another High Tide, a Snap, a Turnabout. Yeah, that is the Turnabout. She's going to first cast some more High Tides. So the tide has risen up to 4. Plays a top. Taps that 4 to snap the Mist Hollow Griffin, untapping 2 lands. She has 5 mana still floating. Cast Preordain. She doesn't have the win con yet. She has to refine the Blue Sun Zenith. But once she does Turnabout, untapping all her candles should make enough mana to Zenith Andrew for 60.
Oh, yeah. And then some, I'm sure.
Yeah. If he was playing EDH, he'd still probably be dead. I see here, yep, Merchant Scroll. She's going to go ahead and get that Blue Sun Zenith again. And now I imagine you see Turnabout. She's going to float all her mana here, cast Turnabout, untapping artifacts. 3 more candlesticks. Don't have an exact count on the mana, but we have 6 lands, each tapping for 5 apiece, so that's 30 mana, 6 to untap them. Every candlestick represents 24 mana. So right there, she has 72 mana on the 3 candlesticks, which is more than enough to mill his whole deck.
It's either a Blue Sun for 8 or 62.
And there goes. Feline Longmore takes down game 3 in extra turns. She defeats Andrew Wright, and she also moves to 7-0. And what I would have to imagine is the second player in our top 8.